The lantern shore. The lantern hissed behind thick glass, casting a warm amber glow over the iron chamber. Outside, the sky was a bruised bruise. Thunder did not crack. It rolled low and slow, like something vast and ancient breathing beneath the waves. Elias leaned on the brass, railing encircling the lighthouse's top chamber. He stared out into the storm. The sea below did not crest. It exploded. Waves hurled themselves at the cliff like a fury denied. Rain came slashing in sheets, wind shoving it sideways, needles against the tower's thick windows. Beyond it all, the horizon was obliterated. The lantern's light turned in a perfect rhythm. It had to. That was his job. That was what mattered. His fingers were red from adjusting the lens gear, stiff from cold despite the wool gloves. He didn't mind. He liked when things needed doing. Tasks kept thoughts away. There were no ships tonight. No lanterns in the distance. Just that monstrous black water, eating itself, roaring like it meant to reach him here. Tear down the tower and drag him into its throat? He wondered. Not for the first time, if it ever would. Thunder rolled again, louder this time. The railing buzzed under his palms. He looked down. The rocks far below the cliffs were buried under surf. The narrow inlet twisted in white froth, seafoam boiling against jagged black stone. Then lightning lit it all. One single flash, and for a heartbeat Elias saw something. Not driftwood, not seaweed, a shape. Small, pale, human. Then the dark swallowed it whole. He didn't breathe for 3 full seconds. Then he turned, fast, and ran down the spiral stairs. 2 at a time. Boots thudding. The sound swallowed by the tower's hollow bones. He did not speak. There was no one to speak to. But the storm had heard his breath catch. And the sea had offered something up. Morning did not come so much as bleed into the storm. The rain had softened, but the sky was still thick and gray, a low ceiling of wool. Mist curled over the cliff path like smoke. The air was damp enough to drink. Elias moved quickly, hunched inside his oilskin coat, boots sucking at the muddy earth. He followed the narrow footpath down toward the jagged inlet, where the surf broke against rocks older than memory. He hadn't told his uncle. There would have been too many questions. Besides, something in the pit of his stomach said this needed to be done alone. Wind tugged at his collar as he descended. Seabirds shrieked above, spiraling on the updrafts. The beach below was a chaos of drift and wreckage. Planks, a broken crate, a scarf wrapped around a splintered oar. And there, half buried between a curve of black stone and a rise of wet sand, was the body, naked but for torn underthings. Pale legs curled toward the chest, hair plastered with brine. One arm thrown out, fingers half closed, like he'd been reaching for something and missed. Elias stepped closer, heart hammering. Then the boy coughed. It was faint, wet, barely more than a sound a shell would make if filled with air and sorrow. But it was breath, alive. Elias dropped to his knees beside him. Rain dripped from his hood. His hands hovered, touch or not. His mouth opened, but no words came. The boy's lips moved barely. Elias leaned in close. He heard only one thing, a breath, then silence, and then the boy's eyelids fluttered once and closed again. It was like hauling sea glass from a dream. Elias wrapped the boy in his coat and took him over one shoulder, legs dangling, head resting against his back. Every step up the cliff was slippery, slow, punishing. The boy was lighter than expected, but solid. Warm, even soaked, breath steady, face against Elias's neck. Elias did not allow himself to think. He didn't ask who the boy was, or why he had been claimed and then returned by the sea. He just climbed. The wind shrieked once, slicing sideways off the moor, and he turned his body to shield the boy's face. One foot slipped. He caught himself on a root, heart pounding. The contact was too much. The softness of the boy's stomach brushing his shoulder, the curve of hip and thigh where the cloth didn't reach. The smell, salt, rain, something faintly like citrus peel. Elias grit his teeth and focused on each step. He didn't know why his throat felt tight. By the time he reached the lighthouse door, he was soaked to the bone, legs shaking. He carried the boy inside. The fire had been dead. Elias lit it fast, hands practiced, kindling match breath. Smoke filled the chimney, then cleared, warmth blooming outward like a secret. He stripped the wet cloth from the boy with shaking fingers, wrapped him in wool blankets that smelled of cedar and old salt. The boy murmured once, shifted, but did not wake. Elias sat beside the cot, watched. A drop of water slid from the boy's hair, traced his cheek, vanished down his neck. Then his eyes opened. Just like that. Elias froze. They stared at each other. The boy's eyes were gray, like the sea when the sun tries to pierce it. He blinked once, twice, his lips parted, but no sound came. Elias didn't move, and then the boy smiled, barely, not joy, not even recognition, just a gentle tug at the corners of his mouth, like he saw something in Elias that didn't frighten him. Then the smile faded, and he closed his eyes again. The wind returned after dusk, whispering through the shutters like it had something to say, but didn't know the words. Elias lay on the small cot across the room, blanket over his chest, eyes open to the ceiling. The fire was a low glow now, all reds and oranges, like the inside of a mouth. Across the room, the boy breathed. Elias had given him a name, silently. For now, Callan, he didn't know why. It just felt right. As if the sea hadn't taken his name, only changed it. He listened to Callan's breath, counted each rise and fall like waves. He didn't know if he was afraid, or if he'd just never been this close to someone who felt like an answer he hadn't known he'd asked. The sea moaned outside. The lantern above turned. And in the dim warmth of the lighthouse, two boys floated inside the same still silence, one dreaming, the other wide awake. The fire had settled into a thick, orange hush, the kind of warmth that swayed against the skin like breath. Elias sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees tucked to his chest, eyes fixed on the sleeping boy. Until Callan stirred. His breathing hitched first, then his arm moved, fingers curling in the wool blanket. He shifted on to his side, eyes still closed, then blinked once, slow, as if waking underwater. He didn't startle, just looked, right at Elias. They stared for a long time, not frozen, but still, like two creatures watching each other across a clearing. "You're awake," Elias said softly, voice dry from disuse. Callan nodded faintly, then frowned. "Where?" His voice was cracked stone. "Where is this?" "Lighthouse. Shoreline cliffs." Callan looked around the room, gaze passing over shelves, hooks, the fire, the lantern. Then back to Elias. "You found me." "You were on the rocks," Elias said. "The sea nearly swallowed you." Callan didn't react, just lay there, blinking slowly. "Callan?" Elias said, quiet. "That's what I called you." "You didn't have any papers or anything." Callan rolled the name on his tongue. "Callan," he repeated, as if tasting it. "I like that." Elias felt his throat tighten. "What's your name?" Callan looked at him again. "I don't know." Elias poured water from a pitcher into a clay mug. He handed it over with both hands. Callan's fingers brushed his when he took it. He drank deeply, eyes half, lidded like he'd forgotten thirst. Then Elias offered a shirt, one of his own, soft from too many washings, still smelling faintly of salt and cedar wood. Callan pulled it on slowly, letting the blanket fall away first. His skin was still damp, smooth, not sickly pale, but flushed with faint color now, golden in the firelight. The shirt clung to him in places, dimpled around the collarbone. His hair, long and tangled, dripped onto the fabric, leaving dark patches that spread like ink. Elias watched too long, then looked away, fast. Callan didn't speak, just tugged the hem down over his hips and settled back into the cot, mug in hand. The silence grew wide between them again. But it wasn't empty. Elias turned to put the pitcher away when he heard it. Elias, his name, spoken low. Slow, As if trying it out, he froze, then turned. Colin was watching him. "You didn't tell me your name," Colin said, lips barely curved. "I just heard you say it." Elias nodded, heart moving somewhere it shouldn't. "Elias?" Colin said again, and this time the words sounded different. Less like a label, more like a question. Like a secret he was unwrapping. Elias opened his mouth, then closed it. Colin set the mug aside. "I don't remember anything," he said, "before the storm. I just remember the cold, then the light. I think it was your lighthouse." Elias didn't answer. Colin's eyes lingered on him, not his eyes. Elias stepped back. They sat by the hearth as twilight dimmed. Colin curled one leg up under himself, Elias sitting cross-legged across from him. Between them, a plate of cold bread and soft cheese went mostly untouched. Colin hummed softly. It wasn't a song Elias knew. There were no words, just melody, fragile as smoke, rising and falling like the tide. "You know that tune?" Elias asked. Colin paused. "No. Maybe. You just made it up. Maybe." Silence again. Then Colin reached, casually, for a piece of bread. His hand brushed Elias's. Not a touch meant to linger, but it did. Fingers against fingers. Warm. Real. Elias pulled his hand back fast. Colin didn't flinch. Didn't even react. Just picked up the bread, tore a small piece, and ate it. The fire crackled. Shadows flickered on the wall. Elias stared at the flame. Colin hummed again, softer this time. The beds were far enough apart to be proper, but not so far that Elias couldn't hear every breath. The fire had dwindled, painting the stone walls with long, low flickers of gold and blood orange. Wind whispered at the windows. The sea moaned somewhere out in the blackness. Elias lay still, blanket up to his chest, eyes on the ceiling. Across the room, Colin turned onto his side. Blanket slipped down to the curve of his shoulder. His breathing shifted, deeper. But not sleep, just stillness. Elias closed his eyes, then opened them again. Colin didn't move, but something in the air between them did. It warmed, thickened, as if the silence was no longer empty, but waiting. Elias didn't know what for. He only knew he didn't feel alone anymore. And that was terrifying. Rain made a sound like thousands of soft hands drumming above them. It had not stopped since dawn. Sometimes light as breath, other times hammering hard enough to rattle the shutters. The iron roof sang with it, a slow, hypnotic rhythm. It made the whole lighthouse feel wrapped in water. Elias moved through his usual morning ritual with precise stillness. Logs for the fire, dishes washed, lanterns refilled. He didn't speak much. Colin followed him barefoot, shirt hanging loose off one shoulder, sleeves rolled, You don't have to. Elias started. I want to. Cullen said. I hate doing nothing. It makes my skin itch. Elias said nothing more. They worked in near silence, broken only by the occasional clink of metal or creak of floorboard. Until the moment Elias reached for the broom leaning against the wall. Cullen's hand reached at the same time. Their fingers touched, not brushing, pressed. Warm, solid, skin on skin. Elias's hand jerked back as if burned. The broom clattered. Cullen caught it mid-fall, grinning. I won, he said simply. Elias didn't answer. Cullen handed him the broom with a wink. And for the next hour, Elias couldn't stop thinking about how warm Cullen's hand had been. The kitchen smelled of iron kettle and damp wool. Elias stood by the wood stove, coaxing the flame under the kettle, his fingers wrapped in cloth. He moved slowly, methodically, measured leaves, sliced lemon, added a spoon of honey. It gave him something to do that didn't involve looking across the room. Cullen entered barefoot. The hem of Elias's borrowed pants rolled just above his ankles. His steps were silent, like he didn't quite belong to the floor. He sat down at the bench without a word, elbows on knees, watching. The kettle began to whistle, high and breathy. Elias poured the water, stirring the mixture carefully. His hand trembled. Cullen's voice broke the quiet. Why do your hands shake when you're not cold? Elias stilled. He didn't look up, just finished stirring and handed Cullen the mug. They don't. Cullen took the mug but didn't drink. They do when I'm watching, he said softly. Elias sat beside him, further than he wanted, but closer than he could explain. Cullen's knee bumped his. He didn't move it. Steam rose between them, curling in the air like invisible fingers. Neither spoke, but neither moved away. Cullen sipped his tea, made a face, and added more honey. Then, without warning, he leaned back against the wall and said, I'm fairly certain I was a prince. Elias blinked. What? And Cullen nodded solemnly. Yes, royalty. You can tell by my hands. He held one up, fingers splayed, pale and elegant. Look, absolutely useless. Fit for nothing but silk gloves and light applause. Elias stared at him, confused. You think. And I believe, Cullen said, cutting him off with a dramatic flourish, that I was the scandal of the court. Too beautiful to banish, too disobedient to keep. Elias coughed, then laughed. Not a snort. Not a breath through the nose. A real laugh. Sharp, surprised, unwilling. Cullen beamed. There it is, he said. You do have a laugh. Elias looked away, still smiling. You're impossible. I've been told. They lapsed into a softer silence after that. Not so thick, not so dangerous. just quiet. Elias reached for his mug again, still smiling faintly. Callan leaned his head against the wall, eyes half closed. Outside, rain ticked against the windows. Inside, the air warmed. Something had eased, just a little. The sun never broke the clouds. By the time evening pressed against the windows, the lighthouse was wrapped in the kind of dark that pressed softly, like velvet against skin. They lit candles, short, squat, uneven from years of storage. Their glow cast long shadows on the stone walls, everything gold and flicker. Elias brought a plate of bread and butter between them. They ate slowly, in the hush that came after laughter. Callan tore pieces absently, chewing with that same look of dreamy detachment. Then he reached across the small table. 2 fingers, 1 crumb, from Elias's plate. He lifted it to his lips and placed it there. Without hurry, without a smirk, eyes on Elias the entire time. Elias's hand stopped mid-air. Callan chewed. Swallowed, didn't look away. Elias didn't either. Couldn't. His chest felt tight in a way he didn't understand. Then Callan turned back to the plate, as if nothing had happened, but something had. Later, the fire was low again. The candles had burned down to thick stumps, their light flickering tiredly. Elias sat in the shadows, back to the hearth, elbows on his knees, staring at the space where Callan sat cross-legged on the floor, unraveling a piece of twine he'd found in a drawer. He was quiet now, calm, fingers working slowly, hair falling over one eye. Elias didn't mean to stare, but he did. Something in the way Callan's lips moved as he focused, the gentle line of his throat when he tilted his head, the way his feet flexed and curled when he was thinking. Callan looked up suddenly, met Elias's eyes. Elias froze. "I wasn't," he began. Callan tilted his head. "Yes, you were." Elias swallowed. His mouth opened. Closed, Callan set the twine aside, crawled forward on hands and knees, until he sat directly in front of Elias. Then leaned in, close enough that Elias could smell his skin. Soap, salt, and something like warm linen. Callan's voice was a whisper, soft against the air between their faces. "It's okay. I watch you too." What Elias looked away, but he was smiling now, just barely. The rain had become a constant hum, a low lullaby that wrapped around the lighthouse like a second skin. Callan stood in the middle of the small washroom with bare feet and arms crossed over his chest. "I can't keep smelling like sea rot forever," he said, not quite joking. Elias didn't argue. He only nodded, then retrieved the old tin basin from under the bench. He boiled water in the kettle and poured it into the basin slowly, steam curling up into his face like breath. Then he carried it into the room, careful not to spill. Callan watched him, head tilted, arms loose now at his sides. Elias set the basin down. "You'll want to let it cool a little." Callan nodded once, then pulled the shirt over his head. Elias's breath stopped. Callan's body was lean, long lines and hollows, shoulders and collarbones like sculpted stone. But it was the wound that held Elias still. A deep, angry mark across the right side of Callan's ribs. It had scabbed unevenly, purple and red, the edges jagged. Not from rocks. Elias stared. Callan caught the look. "I know," he said quietly. Elias said nothing, just crouched beside the basin and dipped a cloth in the steaming water. The cloth steamed in Elias's hand. He wrung it out, then turned slightly to face Callan. Still crouched, still silent. Callan sat on the edge of the wooden stool, his legs parted slightly, arms resting on his thighs, the wound bare under the flickering lamplight. Elias reached out slow. The moment his hand touched skin, Callan inhaled. Not sharply, just a breath, real and human. Elias wiped around the edges of the wound first. His fingers trembled against the heat of Callan's body, but he tried to stay steady. Callan said nothing. His gaze never left Elias's face. Elias dipped the cloth again, moved closer. The wound wasn't fresh, but it hadn't healed clean. It looked torn, like something sharp had raked across him. His hand brushed Callan's side, knuckles sliding along the soft edge of his ribs. Callan flinched then. Not from pain, from closeness. Elias paused. Callan didn't move. Elias returned to the task, slower now, gentler, every inch of skin under his hand mapped like it might vanish. The air between them filled with breath and steam and silence. Callan shifted on the stool, turning slowly, the muscles in his back flexing faintly as he moved. He sat forward now, spine bowed slightly, the damp air clinging to his skin. Elias knelt behind him. The cloth, warm again, touched the nape of Callan's neck. He flinched, not from pain, but from cold air, where warmth had been. Elias dragged the cloth downward in a slow, straight line. Each vertebra stood out in perfect definition, the shape of him all bone and grace. The candlelight kissed every angle. Shoulder blades like wings folded tight. The elegant arch at the base of his spine. Elias followed the trail lower, soaking the cloth again when it cooled. Down across smooth skin to the subtle flare of Callan's hips. He worked carefully, like the boy would break if touched wrong. Callan said nothing. Then he shivered, only once. But he didn't pull away. Elias's hand hesitated at the curve where back became side. His fingers rested there too long. The room was quiet, but the silence was different now. Heavier. The kind that pressed against your mouth and asked you not to speak. The cloth slipped from Elias's hand into the basin with a soft splash. His fingers, still damp, lingered at the edge of Callan's waist, just below the ribs, where skin was warm and smooth and frighteningly alive. He wasn't even pretending to clean anymore. Callan hadn't moved. Elias could feel the rhythm of his breathing now. Steady but shallow, as if he were trying not to make noise. Then Callan turned. Slowly. Elias stayed on his knees. Callan twisted just enough that their knees touched. Bare skin to warn denim. His shirt still lay folded on the stool beside them, forgotten. His chest caught the flicker of candlelight in soft glows and sudden shadows. Neither moved. Callan looked down at Elias's hands, then at his face. He didn't say anything, didn't lean in, just waited. Their eyes locked. Elias's mouth parted slightly. The breath between them hung there, trembling, close enough to kiss if it were a thing you could see. But nothing moved. Not yet. Callan was the first to move. He reached for the shirt with slow fingers, never breaking eye contact with Elias, until the fabric passed between them. Then the moment closed. He pulled it over his head in one fluid motion, the hem dropping to his hips, like a curtain falling on something private. Elias sat back on his heels, hands in his lap, eyes down. The basin steamed faintly beside them. The air was still warm, but something had shifted. Callan stood, smoothing the shirt with both hands. His voice didn't come. Neither did Elias's. The storm still murmured at the windows. The candle hissed. They stood in silence, not touching, not retreating, just altered. As if something had been named in the quiet between their breaths and could not be unnamed again. Elias rose slowly, brushing water from his fingers. He stepped past Callan without looking. But in his chest, something remained. Something he hadn't known, had been waiting for a hand to find. The fog had settled into the world, like breath that wouldn't leave. It rolled up the cliffs in long, white fingers, brushing the windows and curling under the doorframe. From the kitchen, the lighthouse looked like it was floating inside a dream. Elias stood by the spiral stair, lantern oil in one hand, the long brass key in the other. Going up, Callan asked from behind him. Elias turned, startled. The light's dimming. Needs cleaning. Callan crossed the room in 3 silent steps. I'll come. You don't have to. I want to, Callan said. Elias hesitated, then nodded. They started the climb. The stairs were narrow, coiled tight inside the tower's throat. Stone and iron, slick from the fog's kiss. Each step moaned faintly underfoot. Callan followed close. Too close. His breath touched Elias's neck on every turn. His presence was like a second pulse. Steady, insistent, quiet. Neither spoke. The higher they climbed, the more the outside world disappeared. By the time they reached the final curve, Elias could feel heat building behind his ribs, not from exertion, from something else, something waiting. The lantern chamber was warm from the glass and the slow turn of the beacon. The fog outside caught the light and scattered it into gold haze. Elias moved quickly, placing the oil canister down, opening the access hatch with practiced fingers. The lens groaned faintly as he adjusted it. Colin stood just behind him, too close. Elias could feel him there without turning. His warmth, his stillness, the way his breath didn't match the rhythm of the storm anymore. "You keep it alive," Colin said softly. Elias nodded. "If it goes dark, ships don't see the rocks." "Have you ever let it go dark?" "No." Colin didn't answer. Elias lit the wick again, bright and steady. He turned the dial to adjust the rotation speed. His fingers slipped once. "You okay?" Colin asked. "Fine," Elias said. Colin stepped closer. Not touching, but closer. The chamber barely fit them both. Elias could see his own reflection in the glass. The outline of Colin behind him, and his own face, pale and rigid. He could hear his own breath now. He could hear Colin's. And he didn't know which was which anymore. The lens clicked into alignment. Light flooded the chamber in a wide, slow sweep, casting everything into amber gold, then shadow, then gold again. Elias reached to close the hatch, and then Colin moved. His hand slid along the railing, just beside Elias's. Their arms brushed, bare skin against sleeve. Warm, intentional. Elias turned, too fast, and there he was, Colin, closer than breath. Elias's back pressed against the cool glass of the chamber wall. Colin stood in front of him, gaze quiet but direct. Mouth parted slightly, like he was about to say something, but had forgotten what. Neither moved. The light swept over them again, painting the hollow of Colin's throat, the slope of Elias's jaw. Elias didn't step away. Couldn't. Wouldn't. Colin's gaze dropped, just for a breath, to Elias's lips. Then back up. Neither said a word. The fog wrapped the tower like gauze, sealing the moment in silence. Colin didn't move all at once. He leaned in slowly, as if giving Elias time to breathe, or to run. Elias did neither. He stayed frozen, not with fear, with something heavier, something softer, like the stillness before a wave crests. Their faces were inches apart. Their breaths met in the space between. Warm, mingling, quick. Colin tilted his head slightly. His lips parted, just enough. His eyes searched Elias's, waiting for something. Permission. Willingness. An answer. Elias didn't move. But he didn't close the distance either. He wanted to. Every nerve in his body screamed for it. but the moment was too sharp, too delicate. Then, a thud from below, a door, a shift, something real, both of them stilled. The spell cracked, just slightly. Colin blinked, pulled back an inch. Elias swallowed, mouth dry. The silence was different now, but changed. Colin looked down, smiled softly, then stepped away. The light circled behind them, casting slow, moving shadows against the tower walls. As they made their way down the narrow stairwell, neither spoke. The sound of their boots on iron was soft, careful, like they didn't want to disturb the silence they'd created. Elias walked ahead this time. Colin followed close, his breath steady, his gaze lowered. Halfway down, the stair twisted tighter. Elias's hand moved to the rail for balance. Colin's hand found it at the same time. Their fingers touched. Not a mistake. Colin didn't pull away. Elias didn't either. They left their hands there, touching, just enough to feel the shape of the other's knuckles. Just enough to know they were real. Step by step, they descended like that. The light above continued to turn, and below, the air grew warmer. Elias woke to stillness, the kind that doesn't come often on the coast. No rattling shutters, no water thrashing stone, no iron roof groaning under the weight of wind. Just a soft, blank quiet. He sat up slowly, blanket sliding off his chest. The fire had gone out sometime in the night. The hearth held only a faint trace of warmth, like someone's hand had just lifted from the stone. Colin wasn't there. Elias stood and moved to the door. Outside, the world was washed clean. Not clear, but hushed. The sky and earth blurred into mist, the sea hidden behind a white veil. The cliff's edge looked closer, sharper somehow, like it had stepped forward, while no one was watching. Colin stood at the brink, barefoot. His shirt flapped lightly in the breeze, hair pulled back behind one ear, arms crossed over his chest. Elias joined him without a word. The fog curled around their legs. Together, they watched the world disappear into light. The path down to the beach was slick, the grass wet enough to bead on their ankles as they walked side by side in silence. The tide had pulled back, leaving behind a trail of seaweed, shattered shells, and stones still steaming faintly from the night. Colin crouched now, and then to touch things. Bits of driftwood, pieces of glass softened by salt and time. Elias didn't ask what he was looking for. Halfway down the beach, Colin paused. He picked something up, turned it over in his fingers, wiped it on the hem of his shirt, then turned to Elias. Wordless, he reached out. Elias extended his hand without thinking. Colin placed the object in his palm. A stone, smooth and grey and perfect, shaped like a heart, worn into that form not by hands, but years. Elias looked up, startled. Callan didn't speak. Their fingers touched again, lingered this time, not by accident. The sea moved softly behind them, the sound of it endless and low. Elias closed his fingers around the stone. Callan smiled, and for a long time they didn't move. Elias held the stone in both hands for a moment, unsure what to say. Then he slipped it into the pocket of his coat, fingers trailing the fabric as if to tuck it safely away. Callan didn't let his hand fall back. Instead, he caught Elias's wrist gently, fingers around it, not tight, but firm enough to hold his attention. Elias looked up, lips parted, eyes wide. Callan didn't say anything. He raised Elias's hand slowly, like lifting something fragile from water, then turned it over. His thumb brushed along the soft inside of the wrist. Elias's breath caught. Callan leaned in, and without smiling, without warning, he pressed his mouth to that quiet, trembling place, right where the blood beat just beneath the skin. A kiss, silent and slow. Not lust, not play, reverent. Elias's eyes fluttered, closed for half a second. Just long enough to feel the heat sink in. Just long enough to wonder if he would survive it. When he opened them, Callan was still close, still holding his wrist, but he didn't kiss it again. He just let go. The lighthouse groaned, softly in the bones of its walls, wind curling low through the cracks, whispering beneath the floorboards. They hadn't spoken much since returning from the shore. But when Elias brought out the blanket, thick wool, still holding the scent of cedar from its trunk, Callan didn't hesitate. He dropped to the floor beside him, pulling the blanket over them both without asking. It wasn't a large blanket. Elias lay on his back, eyes open to the ceiling's dark beams. Callan curled beside him, facing away, but close enough that their elbows nearly met in the shared heat. Neither spoke. The silence didn't ask for it. The fire had burned down low. Only its last glow shimmered faintly over the walls. Elias could feel every inch of space between them, every inch they weren't touching. The weight of the blanket was nothing compared to the weight of the unsaid things. Between them, a breath, a glance, a single shift could undo them both. So they stayed still and tried to pretend they were only cold. The fire let out a soft sigh as the last ember died. Elias lay motionless, eyes half lidded, caught somewhere between awareness and sleep. Beside him, Callan shifted. The blanket rustled slightly as he turned onto his back, one arm slipping behind his head, then barely audible beneath the hush of wind, a whisper, soft, measured, not English, a string of syllables that curled and floated like mist, spoken into the dark with no clear shape or direction. Elias didn't recognize the language. But something in the cadence, something in the hush of it, made him still completely. A rhythm, a kind of gentleness, a kind of longing, a name, a memory, a prayer. Elias didn't ask. He only listened. And as the last word fell into the silence, Elias let his eyes close fully, for the first time all day. Callan's breath beside him slowed. The fog outside pressed gently against the windows. Inside, everything was quiet again, and warm. The lights blinked once, then died. A low pop echoed from the fuse box below, followed by a hum of silence that swallowed the lighthouse whole. The electric stove cut out. The firewood was damp. The match Elias struck hissed and curled into ash. He stood in the dark kitchen with one hand on the cold countertop, the other fumbling through a drawer for candles. Nothing but fog pressed against the windows, the kind of night that felt like it had a body. He moved carefully, barefoot on stone, breath puffing in front of him. Them need help. Elias turned. Callan stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thick blanket, one shoulder bare. His feet were bare again, too, silent and pale against the dark floor. "You'll freeze," Elias murmured. Callan shrugged. "So will you." Elias found a stub of a candle and a tin holder, lit it with the last match. The flame bloomed softly, gold and trembling. It touched Callan's face like a lover would. Neither of them moved for a long time. Then Callan said, "Let's just go to bed." His voice was quiet, not tired, just sure. The bedroom was colder than the kitchen, the stone floor biting at their feet as they crossed to the cot. Elias lifted the old quilt, thick wool, patched with a dozen colors faded by salt and time. Callan slipped beneath it first, curling onto his side, facing the wall. Elias climbed in after, careful, deliberate. But there was no room for distance. The cot was narrow, the blanket heavy. By the time Elias settled, they were chest to chest. Callan hadn't moved. He just lay there, eyes open, close enough that Elias could see the pale gold ring around his pupils. The lantern on the bedside table cast its last few flickers across the ceiling. Their legs tangled, by accident at first. Then less so. Elias tried to shift away, but Callan's leg moved with him, slid between his. Their knees touched. Thighs. Hips. The blanket pressed them together like hands holding clay. Elias closed his eyes, exhaled, then opened them again. Callan's mouth was right there. Neither of them had spoken since they'd gotten into the bed. But they hadn't needed to. Callan's voice came in a whisper, low and warm between them. "You're not cold anymore, are you?" Elias shook his head. Callan's fingers brushed his jaw. Then nothing for a heartbeat. Just that. Skin on skin. The quiet weight of waiting. Then he leaned in. No question. no rush. Just the steady press of his lips to Elias's. It wasn't soft. It wasn't shy. It was slow, intentional. A kiss meant to be remembered in every inch of the mouth. A kiss that knew exactly what it was doing and nothing of what came next. Elias didn't move at first. Then his lips opened, just barely, and something shifted. Their mouths fit, moved, held. There was no sound but breath, and then even that stopped. When they finally pulled apart, they stayed there. Foreheads close, eyes half lidded, hearts between beats. Callan didn't smile. Elias didn't look away. Callan kissed him again. Not on the mouth this time. Lower. His lips brushed the line of Elias's jaw, slow and soft. Then the hollow beneath his ear. Then lower still, where the neck meets the shoulder and skin is thinnest. Elias gasped. Quiet, like it surprised him. His fingers twisted in the quilt, muscles tight. His whole body leaned into it, into him. Callan kept going. One kiss after the next, each one deeper than the one before, each one unraveling something Elias had kept buried beneath routine and silence and shadow. Elias tilted his head without meaning to, giving him more. Then he pulled back, fast. Callan froze. Elias sat up slightly, chest rising too quickly, eyes wide in the low lantern light. I can't, he whispered. Not anger, not rejection, just fear. The kind that comes when something you've always wanted finally says yes. Callan didn't move closer, didn't ask, just waited, breathing softly, watching. Elias looked down at his own hands, still clenched in the blanket. Wanting had never felt like this. Elias shifted, turning away beneath the quilt, his back to Callan now. The cold returned the moment he moved. But it wasn't the air. It was the space. He stared into the dark, heart still too loud, skin aching where it had been touched. Behind him, the mattress creaked. Then Callan moved. Not away, closer. He didn't try again. Didn't say a word. He simply leaned in, resting his forehead gently between Elias's shoulder blades. One hand beside Elias's on the mattress, not touching, but near enough to feel the warmth. The breath between them was slow now. No kiss. No question. Only the closeness that stayed behind when the heat had no place to go. Elias didn't move. He couldn't. The wanting was still there, thick and unfinished and alive. But for now, it curled between them like a secret. And slowly, in that tangle of silence and breath, and almost, they both began to fall asleep. Rain tapped against the window like fingertips. Not violent now, just steady, gentle. The kind of storm that didn't want to break anything, only remind you it was still there. Elias woke to warmth. Not the fire, not the quilt, a body. Callan was facing him under the blanket, his head resting on the same pillow, hair mussed, eyes open, watching. Their noses were nearly touching. Elias's breath caught the moment he realized how close they were. How long Colin had been awake like that. He didn't pull back. Neither of them spoke. Their breath mixed in the inches between them, soft and slow. Colin blinked once. His eyes weren't sleepy, just quiet, present. Elias's throat tightened. He didn't know what time it was. Didn't care. He only knew that for the first time in days, he didn't want to be anywhere else. And he didn't want to move. Elias's fingers twitched beneath the quilt. A breath passed between them. Then slowly, so slowly, he lifted his hand. Not to touch, not yet, just to offer. Colin didn't hesitate. He reached out, took Elias's hand in his own, and placed it gently against his bare chest, over his heart. Warmth met warmth. Colin's heart was steady, not loud, not fast, just present. Like it had been waiting there, quietly, for Elias to listen. Elias left his hand there. His thumb moved, just slightly, tracing the skin beneath his palm. Colin's breath changed, and then he leaned in. Their mouths met with no hesitation this time, no tension. Only heat, only intention. Elias's lips parted first. Colin's followed. It wasn't a kiss that asked for anything. It was a kiss that said, "I'm here. I see you." Elias answered without words. They didn't stop. Colin's hands moved first, not in hunger, in offering. He pushed the blanket aside, just enough to slide his palm beneath Elias's shirt, fingertips brushing his ribs. Soft, careful, waiting for breath to hitch. It did. Elias didn't stop him. He only watched, eyes wide, lips parted, as Colin leaned in and kissed the side of his throat, just below the jaw. Then again, lower, slower. The shirt came off in one smooth motion. Tossed gently aside, Elias exhaled shakily. Colin paused, just long enough to let that sound settle. Then he smiled. Not with his mouth, with his eyes, with the warmth in his hands as they moved lower, undoing each button of Elias's trousers with maddening patience. Elias didn't move, didn't run. His fingers reached next, fumbled, then steadied, pulling Colin's shirt over his head. Skin met skin in slow, stuttering inches. The storm outside pressed against the glass in steady rhythm. Rain sliding down windows like hands over flesh. The lighthouse didn't creak this time. It listened. Elias. It came as a breath, spoken against the hollow of his throat. Then again, slower. Elias. The way Colin said, it wasn't like a name. It was like a key. Elias shivered, not from cold. From the way every part of him felt unlatched all at once. Colin's hands moved over him, light, sure reverent, not asking, not demanding. Just there, mapping him with a softness that stole thought. Elias gasped once, then bit down on it. But Cullen heard it, kissed him harder. Elias responded without thinking. Fingers in curls, mouth opening. He learned Cullen like a language he already somehow knew. The dip of his waist, the curve of his back, the places that pulled sound from him like the sea pulling stone. They moved slow. There was no rush, only heat, only trust, only a shared unraveling. "Elias," Cullen whispered again, and Elias trembled, not because he was breaking, because he was finally letting go. The rain had softened to a hush. Like the storm, too, had been holding its breath, and now it exhaled. Beneath the quilt, their limbs stayed tangled, skin against skin, breath on breath, a stillness not from exhaustion, but fullness. Elias lay with his head tucked beneath Cullen's chin, chest rising and falling in slow, uneven rhythms. His fingers rested against Cullen's stomach, not gripping, not needing to. Just there. Cullen hadn't spoken since. He only held Elias gently, one hand in his hair, the other smoothing a line across his back. No questions. No weight. Only warmth. The window ticked faintly with the soft remains of the rain. Light filtered gray, blew through the fog outside. But in the room, there was only amber. Only the scent of salt and skin and slow, burning candle wax. Elias shifted. He pressed his forehead into the soft curve of Cullen's collarbone and whispered, so quiet it almost wasn't sound at all, "Thank you." Cullen didn't reply. He didn't need to. He just breathed in deep and slow, and let his lips rest against Elias's hair as the lightkeeper's boy finally closed his eyes. The drawer stuck halfway. Elias tugged harder, the wood groaning as it scraped open. Dust drifted from the corners, disturbed for the first time in what felt like years. He wasn't looking for anything, just tidying. That's what he told himself. But he kept remembering the word Cullen had whispered in sleep 3 nights ago. A name, not his own. Oren. The letter was folded into quarters and tucked beneath a stack of faded tide charts. The paper was soft with age, edges curled and browned by moisture. The ink had blurred in places, words feathered into smears. But the date was clear. June 3rd, 15 years ago. The writing was in his uncle's hand. The Aurania went down just off the South Reef. 10 souls lost. One boy, blonde, maybe 15, was never recovered. His name might have been Cullen. No record. No family on shore. Sea took him before we ever knew who he was. Elias read it twice. Then a third time. The room felt colder when he folded the letter again. He didn't go looking for Cullen. Not right away. But the sound of the sea through the cracked window suddenly felt less comforting, and more like a question. Cullen stood by the shore, sleeves rolled, wind playing in his hair. He didn't turn when Elias approached. Elias stopped a few steps behind him, the letter still in his coat pocket. "You lied," he said softly. Callan's shoulders rose with a breath. "I didn't know I was." Elias stepped closer. The sea behind them was gray again, but calm. It sounded different today. Less angry, more resigned. "I found a letter," Elias said, "about a shipwreck. 15 years ago. A boy they never found. His name was Colin." "I remember the ship now," Callan said, still not facing him. "Its name started with an A. I was on the deck when the sky split. I remember the mast coming down. I remember the cold." He turned then. His eyes were clear but tired. "I remember drowning." Elias opened his mouth, then closed it. Callan's voice didn't waver. "I remember the water swallowing me. I remember the silence. And then I woke up in your arms." The wind shifted. Elias stepped forward until they stood chest to chest. Elias began. "I don't know what I am," Callan said, "but I know I feel everything. I bleed. I want. I love." He reached up, touched Elias's face. "And right now, I'm still here." The tide had gone out, revealing stones slick with salt and seaweed. They sat side by side on a flat rock, still warm from the day's pale sun. The fog had thinned. Light spilled across the water in soft gold. Callan pulled his shirt up. The scar was still there, angled and deep, faded but unmistakable. The wound Elias had cleaned with trembling hands. Callan traced it with his own fingers, then looked at Elias. "I think that's where I died." Elias didn't answer. Callan let his hand fall to his lap. "I shouldn't have come back," he said. "Or maybe I didn't. Maybe this is something else. A mistake. A mercy. A trick." Elias reached out. He pressed his fingers against the scar, light, reverent, like reading Braille on skin that shouldn't still be warm. Callan inhaled. "I feel everything," he whispered. "I know," Elias said. Callan turned to him, eyes searching. "I'm not supposed to be here." Elias let his hand rest there, flat and open, the scar beneath his palm. "You are now." The sea didn't answer. But for the first time, it didn't argue either. They didn't leave the rock. The tide shifted around them, slow and breathless. Callan's legs were drawn up, arms wrapped loosely around them. Elias sat close, their shoulders brushing with every breath. "It's changing," Callan said quietly. "I can feel it." Elias didn't look at him, just stared at the horizon where water kissed sky. "The thing that brought me back, it's thinning. Like fog burning off, like I was never meant to stay long. Just long enough." Elias clenched his hands. "How long?" "I don't know," Callan said. "But it's harder each day." My body aches like it's forgetting how to belong here. Sometimes I forget to breathe until I hear you do it." Elias turned to him. His voice cracked. "Then stay. Just stay." Callan smiled, painfully soft. "I want to." "Then do." "I don't think I get to choose." They sat in silence. Then Callan reached for Elias's hand and gripped it tight. "You can ask anything of me," he said. "Anything except that." That night, the fire burned low. The wind forgot to howl, and the sea slept without turning. They lay in the same narrow cot, facing each other, blanket tangled between their legs. Callan's breath brushed Elias's chin. His hand splayed softly against Elias's chest, feeling the rhythm that was still wholly human, still wholly here. Elias didn't speak. He just held him, as if he could press time into stillness by force of will alone. Callan didn't speak either. There were no promises left to make. They kissed once before sleep. Long, slow, not out of desire, but need. The kind that said, "If this is the last, let it be enough." Elias woke before dawn. The room was blue with morning. Callan was still asleep, or pretending to be. Elias rose, pulled on his coat, and stepped barefoot down the tower stairs. The beach was silent. The mist was gone. He walked to the edge of the water and stared out, half expecting emptiness. But when he turned, Callan was there, barefoot, wrapped in Elias's old wool blanket, watching him, still here, for now. The tide was low again, the kind of low that left dark ridges in the sand and scattered shells like bones. Elias walked without shoes, his boots slung over one shoulder, the hem of his trousers wet from the surf. Wind tugged lightly at his sleeves, more playful than cruel. In his coat pocket, his fingers curled around the smooth heart-shaped stone Callan had given him. He hadn't taken it out, just held it. The beach stretched ahead in silence. No birds, no boats, just the whispering edge of the sea, licking at the rocks. He stopped near the place where he had first found Callan, half buried, half broken, wholly unreal. There was no sign now, no trace, just tidewater drying in soft streaks over stone. Elias crouched there. He set the stone on the ground, just for a moment, and pressed his palm against it. The sea moved, but it didn't speak. And for the first time, Elias didn't ask it to. He stood, left the stone where it was, and turned toward the lighthouse. The steps creaked beneath his feet as Elias climbed the spiral stair for what felt like the 100th time. But this time slower, hand brushing the iron rail, heart steady. The door to the lantern chamber stood ajar. Light pulsed through the crack in soft, regular sweeps. Inside, Callan stood at the far window, wrapped in the old wool blanket again, one shoulder bare, feet naked against the cold metal floor. The glass glowed gold on his skin. He didn't turn when Elias entered. Didn't have to. The rhythm of the light washed over both of them. Turn, pause, glow, dark. Elias moved closer, stopping beside him, shoulder to shoulder. Their reflections shifted in the curved glass. Shadows stretched long across the floor. No words came. There was nothing that needed saying yet. The light turned again, and they stood there, breathing in time. "I can feel it," Colin said, voice soft, almost afraid to interrupt the turning of the light. Elias didn't look away from the window. "The slipping?" Colin nodded. "Like the sea's forgetting me. Like it might take me back without warning." A long silence passed. Then he said, "But I know what I want to do with the time I have." Elias turned to him, slow and calm. "And?" Callan looked at him fully. "This?" His eyes searched Elias's face, the corners of his mouth, the hollow beneath his throat. "You?" Elias stepped closer, close enough that their shoulders touched. He leaned forward, just enough to press his brow to Callan's. One word, barely a whisper. "Stay." The lantern needed tending. It always did. Callan reached for the oil canister. Elias struck the match. Together, they relit the flame. It caught and hissed to life, golden and pulsing. The lens began its slow turn again, sweeping its light out across the sea. They stood before it, side by side, the warmth of the flame flickering across their skin. Elias reached down, found Callan's hand, held it. "If you go," he said, voice low, steady, "I'll still keep the light burning." Callan's fingers tightened around his. He didn't smile big. "Just enough. Then I'll find my way back." The flame behind them turned again, and the sea, far below, listened. The blanket was spread across the floor, curled in folds where their bodies tangled together. The lantern turned above them, casting long ovals of gold across the walls. Callan lay with his back against Elias's chest, his hands folded over Elias's arms. He was breathing slow, like he did when sleep hadn't come yet, but would. Elias's lips rested against the back of his neck. Below them, the sea moved. It murmured, it breathed, but it didn't call. Not yet. Elias let his eyes fall closed. The light turned again. One slow, faithful sweep across the mist. Callan was warm in his arms. And for now, for this moment, they were exactly where they were meant to be.